Everyone, this is Gayle. Welcome tonight to Overcoming the Obstacles, where we're looking at scriptures about women in the Bible. I am a former pastor, and I'm here with Stellarpiper.
I am a seminary graduate and I've been working in churches since 2018.
There you go. And tonight we're looking at the Book of Ruth, which is, we're going to look at Ruth 1, because we're talking about Ruth, right?
Yep.
So, okay, we're just going to dive right in. And the discussion questions for the Bible study, they're down there in the description box. So just click on the link. The whole study is free, no credit card or anything. It's just a Google Drive document. So feel free to download it and follow along with us. And if y'all have any comments, suggestions, or anything, just leave them over in the chat box and we will be glad to answer those. So, all right. We're looking at the Book of Ruth. Stellar, do you want to go ahead and start off a little bit?
Yeah, I'll read a bit of it. It's a little long to read the whole thing.
Right. And I do want to point out to everyone that we did talk about Naomi in the Book of Ruth, so I'm going to link that down below. We did her, last on our last study. So there you go, Stellar, take it.
All right, I'm starting in Ruth 1, verse 1. In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land, and a certain man of Bethlehem in Judah went to live in the country of Moab, he, his wife, and 2 sons. The name of the man was Elimelech, and the name of his wife Naomi, and the names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem in Judah. They went into the country of Moab and remained there. But Elimelech, the husband of Naomi, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. These took Moabite wives. The name of one was Orpah, and the name of the other Ruth. When they had lived there for about 10 years, both Mahlon and Chilion also died, so that the woman was left without her 2 sons or her husband. Then she started to return with her daughters-in-law from the country of Moab, for she had heard in the country of Moab that the Lord had had consideration for his people and given them food. So she set out from the place where she had been living, she and her 2 daughters-in-law, and they went on their way to go back to the land of Judah. But Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, "Go back each of you to your mother's house. May the Lord deal kindly with you, as you have dealt with the dead and with me. The Lord grant that you may find security, each of you in the house of your husband." Then she kissed them, and they wept aloud. They said to her, "No, we will return with you to your people." But Naomi said, "Turn back, my daughters. Why will you go with me? Do I still have sons in my womb that they may become your husbands? Turn back, my daughters, go your way, for I am too old to have a husband. Even if I thought there was hope for me, even if I should have a husband tonight and bear sons, would you then wait until they were grown? Would you then refrain from marrying? No, my daughters, it has been far more bitter for me than for you, because the hand of the Lord has turned against me." Then they wept aloud again. Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her. So she said, "See, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. Return after your sister-in-law." But Ruth said, "Do not press me to leave you, or to turn back from following you. Where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God my God. Where you die, I will die. There will I be buried. May the Lord do thus and so to me, and more as well, if even death parts me from you." When Naomi saw that she was determined to go with her, she said no more to her. And that kind of kicks off the story.
Really does. You can see the faith of Ruth starting to shine out, and also that she wanted to help take care of her mother-in-law. The interesting thing is that they were, at this point, they didn't have any male protection since Naomi's 2 sons had died, the husbands of Ruth and Orpah, and so there was no one there to take care of them. This would have put them in, according to this Bible, This would have put them in the classes of the widows and the orphans and
Yes, for sure.
foreigners. And so as that they couldn't glean, they wouldn't have been. There was just no protection for them.
Yeah, at the time, a woman had no status without her husband or her sons.
Yeah, and this says that by going back, Naomi would have had some protection from extended family members, and if that fell through, she would have at least been able to glean. But she was in a situation where she had the responsibility for what is essentially still these two daughters, and she can't afford to feed them, and she can't afford to feed herself.
But Ruth, when they get back to Bethlehem, Ruth takes on a lot of that responsibility.
Yes, she does. She does. I'm just giving a little synopsis as far as some of the backstory about where we are.
I'm skipping ahead.
Yeah, that's okay. You skip, girl. So, looking at the questions, question number 1 is who are the main characters in the Book of Ruth, and what do we know about each of them? So, as I see it, the main characters, Ruth, since this whole book is about Ruth, Naomi, then later we have Boaz, Orpah. We will meet some field workers, and we'll meet a family member who denies and doesn't want to marry Ruth because of some complications in his life. And also, of course, her husband that passed away and her 2 sons, because we have 3 widows here in this story. And I think sometimes we fail to make the connection that it's just not one widow. We have 3 widows who are grieving and who are unable to take care of themselves. And there's no hope in having in her Naomi having other children, which would have been, at the time period, any sons that she had would have been sort of pledged to the daughters-in-laws, except that she was beyond childbearing.
And I think Naomi tried to do her best by Orpah by telling her to go back to her family.
I agree. And she went.
And she did.
And so there, she just kind of drops out of the story. We don't hear anything after she goes home, so we can presume that she was taken care of and was able to live her life from that point. But it's interesting, too. At first, we have Ruth and her husband and her sons, and they are going to this foreign land to live where they don't know the customs and they don't know the language. And then we have this flip of Ruth willing to be a widowed foreigner in a foreign land where she doesn't know the customs. And so we see Naomi here in a little bit trying to fill her in kind of as she goes.
One of the commentaries I read said, in a lot of ways, the Book of Ruth is about identity. Because when Naomi's husband and sons died, she was in a bit of an identity crisis. And Ruth, coming back to Bethlehem, which would be to her a foreign land with foreign people and foreign customs, she was very much kind of adrift.
But she did have a little bit of an identity as Naomi's daughter-in-law.
But according to the standards of society at the time, where your identity was wrapped up in your menfolk, she didn't have a lot.
But Naomi had, her identity was tied up in not just being a wife, but in being a mother. And so not only, and having a home. And so not only did she no longer have a home, but she no longer was a wife or a mother. And I think that kind of mothering instinct is what led her to try to send the daughters-in-law back to their families. And of course, we see Ruth going, not so fast. So.
It's a really beautiful speech.
Really. And it's stood the test of time. I mean, how many thousands of years later, and we're still talking about her speech?
A lot.
I mean, it's pretty amazing. So those are the main characters in the book. You could also argue that hunger is not just a topic but a character, because Bethlehem standing for like the house of bread, and that failed them, so they had to go to Moab, and now they're going back, and yeah, and it's not too unlike when we had the potato famines and so forth, and people left, their homeland in Europe to come over to what is now the United States and reestablish themselves. They were fleeing hunger, and they didn't know the customs, the language, and so forth, and had to reintegrate or had to integrate into society. And then a lot of them went back home, which is kind of the path that we see here. So some of the parallels we can identify from the struggles that these women had, we can identify with them because of the sort of more recent stories that we've grown up hearing about people who became sort of transient just due to escaping famine, just like these ladies. So, right. How does the story of Ruth set the stage for future events is our next question. And of course, Ruth is following Naomi. And we kind of, before we dive into that, let's look a little bit more into the story itself, because I think we really need to introduce Boaz.
Yeah. Oh, do you want me to take it, or do you want to take it?
Yeah, you can.
Okay. I'm reading from the NRSV, by the way.
Okay.
Okay, I'm just going to pick up where I left off.
Okay.
That's chapter 1, verse 19, where I'm starting. Okay. So the two of them went on until they came to Bethlehem. When they came to Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred because of them, and the women said, "Is this Naomi?" She said to them, "Call me no longer Naomi, call me Mara, for the Almighty has dealt bitterly with me. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi when the Lord has dealt harshly with me, and the Almighty has brought calamity upon me?" So Naomi returned together with Ruth the Moabite, her daughter-in-law, who came back with her from the country of Moab. They came to Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley harvest. And continuing on into chapter 2. Now Naomi had a kinsman on her husband's side, a prominent rich man of the family of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. And Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, "Let me go to the field and glean among the ears of grain behind someone in whose sight I might find favor." She said to her, "Go, my daughter." So she went. She came and gleaned in the field behind the reapers. As it happened, she came to the part of the field belonging to Boaz, who was of the family of Elimelech. Just then Boaz came from Bethlehem. He said to the reapers, "The Lord be with you." And they answered, "The Lord bless you." Then Boaz said to his servant who was in charge of the reapers, "To whom does this young woman belong?" The servant who was in charge of the reapers answered, "She is the Moabite who came back with Naomi from the country of Moab." She said, "Please let me glean and gather among the sheaves behind the reapers." So she came, and she has been on her feet from early morning until now, without resting for even a moment.
And just to make sure that everybody knows, the gleaning is going behind the workers after they have cleaned off whatever they can get, and she's basically picking up the crumbs of the field. It was also a way of taking care of the poor at that time, similar to like what our food pantries would be today and food banks. We have pantries now, and they had fields to glean back at this time period. Mm-hmm. And then she's here with Boaz and has been working all morning, and that seemed to pretty much impress Boaz.
It definitely seemed to impress the servant.
Yeah. In fact, he takes it up and he says, So Boaz said to Ruth, this is in verse 8, Boaz said to Ruth, my daughter, listen to me. Don't go and glean in another field, and don't go away from here. Stay here with the women who work for me. Watch the field where the men are harvesting, and follow along the other women. I have told the men not to lay a hand on you. And whenever you are thirsty, go and get a drink from the water jars that the men have filled. Now, this was a really big deal because the water jars were for the people who were working. And she had no status. She didn't have claim to the water jars. She didn't have claim to being accepted by the women who were gleaning. And here we have Boaz that starts taking care of her, starts putting her under his protection immediately because he knows what's at risk for a young single woman who is on her own. So you want to pick it up?
Yeah. Let's see. Okay. Verse 10. Then she fell prostrate with her face to the ground and said to him, why have I found favor in your sight, that you should take notice of me when I am a foreigner? But Boaz answered her, all that you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband has been fully told me, and how you left your father and mother and your native land and came to a people that you did not know before. May the Lord reward you for your deeds, and may you have a full reward from the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come for refuge. Then she said, may I continue to find favor in your sight, my lord, for you have comforted me and spoken kindly to your servant, even though I am not one of your servants. At mealtime, Boaz said to her, come here and eat some of this bread and dip your morsel in the sour wine. So she sat beside the reapers, and he heaped up for her some parched grain. She ate until she was satisfied, and she had some left over. When she got up to glean, Boaz instructed his young men, let her glean even among the standing sheaves, and do not reproach her. You must also pull out some handfuls for her from the bundles, and leave them for her to glean, and do not rebuke her.
So this is the equivalent. This is the equivalent. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Cut you off.
Just okay. So. Okay. Boaz invites her to the table where his servants were eating, even though she didn't have any quote-unquote right to be there.
Yeah.
And he basically made her a to-go plate. And on top of that, he told his servants to let her glean even among the standing sheaves. So instead of just gleaning basically the leftovers, the grain that had gotten passed up, she got to glean from the main harvest. And more than that, he told them to pull out some grain from the sheaves for her. So he really was starting to take really good care of her.
But he doesn't take credit for that. Mm-hmm. Did you notice?
No, he doesn't.
He says, talks about her being covered by God. So at this point, it's kind of a realization, I think, that she has made the decision to follow Ruth. And remember, she said, your God will be my God. And here this is coming back up again. Says, may you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. So he's there it is coming up that he knows she's taken refuge under the God of Israel.
Right.
So, and it's kind of like leaving the part where she's able to harvest from like the main crop is kind of like having someone come that is hungry, and you're not just giving them a food pantry if you're at church, but you're going in the church kitchen and you're seeing what else is in there that you can possibly give this person who is hungry. And knowing they're going to come back the next day and the next. So I think sometimes too we get into this kind of help fatigue, care fatigue,
Compassion
however
fatigue.
you want to call it, compassion fatigue, where we don't want to keep helping. And yet there is this young widowed girl. The cultural Bible that I'm looking at said that she was probably early to mid 20s. And that's still pretty young.
Still pretty young.
And he knows she doesn't have a job, so he knows this is going to be somebody who's going to keep coming back to his field. And he doesn't seem to mind it.
No, he doesn't.
So then she goes along. She goes back home to Ruth, where
Goes back home to
she goes
Naomi.
back home to Naomi, where Ruth has this lunch plate that she saves, and she takes that back. What she didn't eat, she took it back to Naomi so Naomi could eat too.
But it's not like she went hungry to give Naomi some food. Boaz gave her enough that she was satisfied, and there was a whole plate for Naomi.
Yep. Which we see a lot of Boaz's character early on as far as his nurturing, his caretaking. And this is, to me, just a great introduction about him, because she's at this point, she's a total stranger. He has no obligation to her. There is no tie holding her to his family except the kindness that he's choosing to extend to her, because Naomi is the one that he's responsible for. But he's kind of figuring out that they're kind of a package deal.
Yeah. Yeah, he's figuring it out.
So then we get to over here in chapter 3, where this has gone on for some time. And then one day, chapter 3 now, Ruth's mother-in-law, Naomi, said to her, "My daughter, I must find a home for you, where you will be well provided for. Now Boaz, with whose women you have worked, is a relative of ours. Tonight he will be winnowing barley on the threshing floor. Wash, put on your perfume, and get dressed in your best clothes. Then go down to the threshing floor, but don't let him know you're there until he's finished eating and drinking. When he lies down, note the place where he is lying. Then go and uncover his feet and lie down, and he will tell you what to do." And then Ruth responds by saying, "I will do whatever you say." So she went down to the threshing floor and did everything her mother-in-law had told her to do. When Boaz had finished eating and drinking and was in good spirits, he went over to lie down at the far end of the grain pile. Ruth approached quietly, uncovered his feet, and lay down. And in the middle of the night, something startled the man. He turned, and there was a woman lying at his feet. "Who are you?" he asked. "I am your servant Ruth," she said. "Spread the corner of your garment over me, since you are a guardian redeemer of our family." "The Lord bless you, my daughter," he replied. "This kindness is greater than that which you showed earlier. You have not run after the younger men, whether rich or poor. And now, my daughter, don't be afraid. I will do for you all you ask. All the people of my town know that you are a woman of noble character. Although it is true that I am a guardian redeemer of our family, there is another one who is more closely related than I. Stay here for the night, and in the morning, if he wants to do his duty as your guardian redeemer, good. Let him redeem you. But if he is not willing, as surely as the Lord lives, I will do it. Lie here until morning." So I was really confused about why is she going to go lay at his feet. And this is what my Bible says. This is a cultural study Bible. So we're just going to see if this can give us some more insight. And it says, sometimes the Hebrew word translated feet is a euphemism for the genital region, and perhaps, but most of the time, feet simply means feet. Complicating the interpretation, however, is the use of uncover, which can be sometimes referred to as sexual relations. Nevertheless, Naomi instructs Ruth to uncover, quote, "the place of his feet," And given the character reflected of both Boaz and Ruth, there is no reason to infer that anything more than uncovering the feet occurs. The meaning of this apparently significant action is unknown to us. But I did read in another section that it was a way of her putting herself completely under his protection because the feet are the dirty part of the body. If you'll think about it, later, Jesus washed his servants' feet.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a very dirty kind of a lowly lower part of the body. And so what I read was her putting herself completely under his protection and surrendering her will to what he wanted. And that's why Naomi said, he'll tell you what to do. So she keeps exhibiting faith.
She does.
I don't know that would be, I think I would be freaking out at this point.
I would have been freaking out 2 chapters ago.
Would you? Okay, I can see that actually too. So
thanks.
Well, I mean, she's left without anybody too. And then it says, and this is more caretaking on Boaz's part. So she lay at his feet until morning, but got up before anyone could be recognized. And Boaz said, no one must know that a woman came to the threshing floor. And he also said, bring me the shawl that you're wearing and hold it out. When she did so, he poured into it 6 measures of barley and placed the bundle on her. Then he went back to town. And when Ruth came to her mother-in-law, Naomi asked, how did it go, my daughter? And she told her everything Boaz had done and added, he gave me these 6 measures of barley, saying, don't go back to your mother-in-law empty-handed. So he cared about her reputation. He didn't want people to know that she had been there because he didn't want, anybody. He told her, no one must know that a woman came to the threshing floor. And then he filled her shawl with barley, with food for her and Naomi. So exciting times.
Mm-hmm.
So you want to pick it up at 4?
At 4, sure.
Uh-huh.
No sooner had Boaz gone up to the gate and sat down there than the next of kin, of whom Boaz had spoken, came passing by. So Boaz said, come over, friend, sit down here. And he went over and sat down. Then Boaz took 10 men of the elders of the city and said, sit down here. So they sat down. He then said to the next of kin, Naomi, who has come back from the country of Moab, is selling the parcel of land that belonged to our kinsman Elimelech. So I thought I would tell you of it and say, buy it in the presence of those sitting here, and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, redeem it. But if you will not, tell me, so that I may know, for there is no one prior to you to redeem it, and I come after you. So he said, I will redeem it. Then Boaz said, the day you acquire the field from the hand of Naomi, you are also acquiring Ruth the Moabite, the widow of the dead man, to maintain the dead man's name on his inheritance. At this, the next of kin said, I cannot redeem it for myself without damaging my own inheritance. Take my right of redemption yourself, for I cannot redeem it. Now this was the custom in former times in Israel concerning redeeming and exchanging. To confirm a transaction, one party took off a sandal and gave it to the other. This was the manner of attesting in Israel. So when the next of kin said to Boaz, acquire it for yourself, he took off his sandal. Then Boaz said to the elders and all the people, today you are witnesses that I have acquired from the hand of Naomi all that belonged to Elimelech and all that belonged to Chilion and Mahlon. I have also acquired Ruth the Moabite, the wife of Mahlon, to be my wife, to maintain the dead man's name on his inheritance, in order that the name of the dead may not be cut off from his kindred and from the gate of his native place. Today you are witnesses. Then all the people who were at the gate, along with the elders, said, We are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming to your house like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the house of Israel. May you produce children in Ephrathah and bestow a name in Bethlehem. And through the children that the Lord will give you by this young woman, may your house be like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah. So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. When they came together, the Lord made her conceive, and she bore a son. Then the women said to Naomi, Blessed be the Lord, who has not left you this day without next of kin, and may his name be renowned in Israel. He shall be to you a restorer of life and nourisher of your old age. For your daughter-in-law who loves you, who is more to you than 7 sons, has borne him. Then Naomi took the child and laid him in her bosom and became his nurse. The women of the neighborhood gave him a name, saying, A son has been born to Naomi. They named him Obed. He became the father of Jesse, the father of David.
And from there into the lineage of Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
So cool. What a reward for Ruth's faith.
Right?
No.
Oh, man.
And a reward for Naomi, too, because she has a grandson.
Mm-hmm.
And I will attest to the world that grandkids are great. Just saying. You don't have to have children to be fulfilled, but grandkids, they're pretty cool. So, all right. So, over to our questions, which are linked below. How does the story of Ruth set the stage for future events? I read that a minute ago. I hope you've been thinking about it as we were reading. And I think it's pretty clear. Stellar, what about you? Do you think it's clear?
I think it's clear. I also think it's really cool.
The future events being the birth of Jesus. Because there's the lineage and there is Ruth's faith story right there. Setting the stage. So, number 3. What were some of the individual similarities faced by the women in the story of Ruth and Naomi? So, kind of talked about that.
We already touched on how they both kind of had a bit of an identity crisis moment. They both suffered hunger and desperation, grief and loss, all of that.
Yeah. They really had more alike than they had differences at this stage of their lives. Because we talked about, Naomi left Bethlehem and lived the part of the foreigner in the foreign land where she lost, her family. And the flip of Ruth going to become the foreigner in the foreign land. So they had that shared commonality in addition to the hunger and the grief and the losing of the homes, and the whole insecurity.
Mm-hmm.
So,
absolutely.
And it says, number 4, Ruth and Naomi faced difficult circumstances, including widowhood and poverty. How did Ruth demonstrate faith, loyalty, and resilience in the midst of the adversity? And I know I'm looking over here. I've got this on 2 screens, so the questions are here, and you're here. And then Stellarpiper's here. So, wow. Okay, so difficult circumstances, including widowhood and poverty, but she demonstrated her faith beautifully in the song, the words of, your people will be my people and your God will be my God. If that doesn't demonstrate your faith, wow.
She also really personified loyalty, and I think that's part of what impressed Boaz.
I think so too. And also her loyalty of following Naomi's instructions.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Of course, she was still learning the land and the culture and the customs. So she was relying on Naomi for advice. But she also had to know that there was going to be some risk going to Boaz and, being at his feet, because he could have yelled at her, cast her out. He didn't have to give her the barley and feed her and take care of her. But yet it touched his heart that she did that.
One commentary I read said the story of Ruth is a story about two women making better circumstances for themselves, basically in spite of all of their obstacles and in spite of a society who did not value them.
Yes. I think that's well said. Okay. Over here on number 5, how does the Book of Ruth illustrate the concepts of kindness, hospitality, and redemption? Wow, it's just woven all the way in.
It really is. I mean, you get Boaz exemplifying hospitality and kindness. You get Ruth with all of those things. You get Naomi with faith.
Well, even there, back at the very beginning, where she is, Naomi is telling the daughters-in-law to go back. That was an act of kindness on her part.
Yeah.
It was also an act of kindness for Ruth to say, no, not going to leave you. So even before we get to Boaz, we see a lot of kindness happening already. And then, of course,
for sure,
Boaz kind of takes the cake. Yeah. So, I mean, that was his profits. When she was going through and she was gleaning, and he says, let her go to the main crop. That's his profits. We're no longer talking about cast-offs and parts that they just couldn't or wouldn't pick up because of whatever reason. We're talking about the main crop.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where it starts getting into the pocketbook.
For sure.
And it was a way of showing hospitality.
Mm-hmm.
I think the whole story too, the redemption part, is amazing, because she has the son, and then the son is there to redeem Naomi and help her through her old age.
And their circumstances were redeemed.
True.
Like the story starts out in this place of sadness and despair and ends with basically a happily ever after. So their whole lives were redeemed.
And it certainly is not going to replace Naomi's husband, and it's not going to replace Ruth's husband, but it's caretaking.
Mm-hmm, for sure.
Okay. What are some practical applications from the Book of Ruth that we can apply to our own lives today?
Well, when in doubt, write a really good speech. But no,
Okay.
Trust. Trust the people around you. Assuming you've surrounded yourself with trustworthy people to begin with, but that's a whole nother discussion.
Yep. Some of the things I wrote down when I did the study: persevere, because that's what they did. Don't give up. Persevere, and feed people who are hungry. They could be Ruth and Naomi, and trust God and trust other people, because if you can trust them. I'm not saying trust everybody, okay? Because you can't, but definitely trust God, and kind of trust the process, because there was kind of a process that was playing out here too. Be loyal and be honest, because if Boaz had wanted to enter into deception, He could have told this kinsman, hey, Naomi's selling the property. Do you want it? Because you've got the next claim to it. And, at first he was like, yeah, I'll buy it. I'll take care of it. And he's like, well, if you do, it comes with this string attached called Ruth. But he easily could have, if he was a different type of person, he easily could have said, okay, it's your property. Congratulations. And then after the transfer had been done, he could have said, by the way.
Well, he could also have let Ruth go off into another field.
True. Refused her.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I think that this really shows being honest and being loyal.
Being authentic.
Yeah. All right. So, how does the Book of Ruth illustrate God's sovereignty and his providential care over his people, even in difficult circumstances? Let me read that again.
Yeah.
Okay. How does the Book of Ruth illustrate God's sovereignty and his providential care over his people, even in difficult circumstances?
One commentary I read talked about how God didn't directly speak to either Ruth or Naomi, but kind of is a background character here. Because as it happened, Ruth picked Boaz's field, not knowing which one it was. And there are a couple of other instances like that in the story, that it just happened that way.
The power of coincidence, which isn't. Mm-hmm. And, putting her in Boaz's field as opposed to the other kin redeemer was pretty cool. I think that was part of his providential care, too. And he gave Boaz the heart to take care of feeding both of these women. And he did. And then he went, kept going a few steps further until he marries Ruth, and then also, takes care of Naomi by presenting her with the baby.
Mm-hmm.
So, all right, where do you see yourself in the story of Ruth and Naomi, and why?
Depends on the day.
Yeah.
Because days when I worked at Arbor, days where I was handing out food to people, I was channeling some Boaz energy there, and other days I'm channeling Naomi, and on really good days I'm channeling Ruth and her faith.
So you've got all of it at some point.
Yep, depends on the day.
And there are some times, Naomi said, call me Mara because I'm bitter. And she thought God had turned away from her, but he hadn't. If he turned away from her, she would have still been back in Moab instead of where she was. So
God was still there, even though she couldn't see it.
Yeah. And I think that's a huge takeaway from their story, too, as much as faith and loyalty and willingness to follow. So, yeah.
Sometimes God's a background character.
But I think, too, sometimes, we have a tendency to get upset, depressed, have more than one really bad day. And I think sometimes we can be bitter. But one of the things we saw through this story is her, Naomi, changing. Mm-hmm. And so I can see times in my life when I have been Mara, and then times when I have been Naomi, and then times when I have been Ruth. So, yeah, I'm with you. I think that's a very good place to be. And just for the folks who are listening, we both have social service backgrounds. So we have both done food pantries, clothing closets, anti-poverty help, things like that. So, yeah. So, all right. Okay, anything else you want to add before we close this evening?
No, I think that's it.
Okay. Well, that's kind of it for me too. So you all definitely give us a like on this live stream, which is actually going to be premiere. So give us a like on the premiere. And don't forget to subscribe, to follow us, because we do these weekly. Sometimes we may have to miss a week, just like everybody else. Life happens.
Life.
But we are here Sunday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern. So hit that subscribe button so you can get notification on
And if you have
all of
any,
this, not just the studies, but we do a lot of positive things too about people who have overcome obstacles and so forth, because that's what this channel is about. And go ahead, what, Stellar?
and if you have any questions about not just Ruth, but any of the women in the Bible that you think we should ponder, put those in the comments.
Definitely. Thank you for saying that. I about forgot it. So there we go. So thank you all very much for watching, and have a great week. Again, those study questions are down below. Just download the whole study guide. It's free, no strings attached. It's a Google Drive document. So thanks for watching, and we will see you next week right here on this channel on Overcoming the Obstacles. So good night, everyone.
Bye.